I evicted my parents on a Tuesday morning. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, legally. With papers slid across a polished desk while my hand stayed steady and my voice didn't shake. The lawyer cleared his throat. My mother stared at me like she was trying to remember my name. My father's jaw tightened in that familiar way, like he was holding back words he'd rehearsed his whole life. No one raised their voice. That came later. But that morning, as the pen scratched across paper and the decision became permanent, all I could think was how strange it was that silence had finally become my weapon. Because growing up, silence was all I ever had. When I was a kid, our house always sounded like laughter, just never directed at me. My younger brother Daniel was what everyone called a natural athlete, natural leader, natural favorite. Teachers loved him. Coaches praised him. At family dinners, relatives leaned toward him, elbows on the table, asking about his latest win or grade or plan. I sat a little farther down, folding my napkin into careful squares, listening. If Daniel broke a window, it was because boys needed space to be boys. If I cracked a glass by accident, my mother sighed like I'd ruined the evening. "You're so careless," she'd say, not looking at me. Honestly, careless, difficult, too sensitive. Those were the words attached to me early on, like labels you couldn't peel off without tearing something underneath. Money was where it showed most clearly. When Daniel turned 16, my parents surprised him with a car. Used, but shiny. Red. He ran his hands over the hood like it was alive. My father clapped him on the back. My mother took photos. When I turned 16, my mother slid a folded bus schedule across the kitchen table. "You're responsible," she said. "You'll understand." I nodded. I always nodded. At 18, Daniel's college fund appeared as if by magic. Years of savings, my parents said proudly, as though they hadn't forgotten to mention it before. Tuition covered, housing covered, spending money for emergencies. When I got my acceptance letter, my father adjusted his glasses and said, "You can take out loans. Builds character." I remember the exact sound my mother made then, a soft hum of agreement, as she stirred her tea. Even later, as adults, the imbalance didn't fade. It sharpened. Daniel started a business in his late 20s, a small one, but risky. My parents remortgaged the house to help him. I found out because I overheard my mother on the phone, whispering numbers like prayers. That night, I asked carefully, "Is everything okay?" She smiled too quickly. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I didn't push. I never did. What they never knew, what they never asked, was that I was building something too. Quietly. I worked 2 jobs. I lived in smaller apartments than I could afford. I saved. I invested. I learned the language of contracts and clauses, interest rates and liability. While Daniel talked big at family dinners, I listened, filed things away, and kept my mouth shut. By the time I was 35, I owned property. Not flashy, not brag-worthy, but solid. Mine. My parents still treated me like a temporary guest in my own life. When I visited, my childhood bedroom remained unchanged. Same old desk, same chipped paint, as if I'd never really left. Daniel, meanwhile, had a renovated guest suite. New furniture, fresh paint. "Just in case," my mother said lightly, smoothing the duvet. In case of what? She never explained. The public event, the one where everything would eventually crack open, was my father's retirement celebration. A large one, community center ballroom, long white tablecloths, people from his career shaking hands and offering congratulations. I didn't even want to go, but my mother called, voice sweet in that way that meant expectation, not invitation. "It would mean so much to your father," she said. "Families should be together for moments like this." So I went. I wore a simple navy dress. I arrived early. I helped set chairs. Daniel arrived late, loud, already telling stories. People gathered around him naturally, like gravity worked differently for him. At one point, a colleague of my father's turned to me and asked, "And what do you do?" Before I could answer, my mother laughed. "Oh, she's very independent," she said, "always doing her own thing." The way she said it made it sound like a phase, or a flaw. I smiled anyway. As speeches began, I noticed small things. My father avoided looking at me. My mother kept checking her purse, fingers brushing the zipper, like she was making sure something was still there. When Daniel stood to speak, the room leaned in. He talked about legacy, about sacrifice, about how our parents had given everything so he could succeed. Applause filled the room. My mother dabbed her eyes. My father beamed. I clapped too, slowly, calmly. Inside, something cold settled into place, because a week earlier, my mother had asked me to come by the house, alone. "We need to talk about something important," she'd said. Her voice had been gentle, careful, the kind of careful that comes before a storm. That conversation, the one that would redraw every line I thought I understood, hadn't happened yet. But it was coming. And standing there in that ballroom watching my family perform a version of itself that left me out entirely, I felt it approaching. Heavy, inevitable, like a door already opening behind me. The conversation happened 3 days after the retirement party. My mother insisted I come to the house in the afternoon, when things are quiet. That should have warned me. Quiet in our family was never peaceful. It was strategic. The house smelled the same as always. Lemon cleaner and old wood. I noticed immediately that my father's car was gone, even though it was a weekday. Daniel's truck, however, sat in the driveway, freshly washed. That too should have warned me. My mother greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She hugged me, lightly, as if I were made of something brittle. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the kitchen table. Daniel was already there, relaxed, one ankle resting on the opposite knee. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Hey," he said, casual. "Didn't know you were coming." My mother avoided my eyes. "I thought it would be best if we all talked together." My stomach tightened, slow and deliberate. She placed a manila folder on the table between us. Thick, heavy, the kind of folder that carries consequences. "We've been doing some planning," she said, "about the future." Daniel nodded. Lips pressed together in something like practiced seriousness. I leaned forward slightly. "Planning for what?" My mother folded her hands. "The house. Assets. What happens later. Later. Always later. As if it were some abstract place we'd all politely visit someday." She slid the folder toward Daniel, not toward me. He opened it easily, like he already knew what was inside. "We've decided," my mother continued, "that it makes the most sense for Daniel to take over the house when the time comes." I waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. I glanced at my brother. He wouldn't look at me now. His jaw worked slightly, chewing on nothing. "And me?" I asked. The word came out softer than I intended. My mother sighed, not heavily, not with regret, with inconvenience. "Well," she said, "you're so self-sufficient. You've always managed on your own." There it was, the compliment that cut. My father still wasn't home. That felt intentional now. "So you're giving him the house," I said slowly. "And what exactly am I getting?" She tilted her head, the way she used to when explaining something obvious to a child. "We thought you wouldn't want anything complicated. There will be some personal items, of course, and?" I prompted. Daniel cleared his throat. Look, he said, finally meeting my eyes. This isn't personal, it's just logical. I have a family. Kids. You don't. I stared at him. You're saying that like it disqualifies me, I said. He shrugged. A small movement, dismissive. You live alone. You've got your investments, properties. You're fine. My mother's eyes flicked up sharply. You didn't tell her? She asked him. He froze. I felt the room shift. Tell me what? I said. Daniel leaned back in his chair, irritation flashing across his face before he masked it. They know about the duplex, he said. And the condo. Mom mentioned it. I mentioned you were doing well, my mother said quickly. I didn't realize. How do you know about my properties? I asked. The air thickened. Daniel's mouth tightened. Because the house is collateral. The word landed wrong. Heavy. Wrong. Collateral for what? I asked. No one answered. My pulse thudded in my ears. Collateral for what? My mother reached for the folder and opened it herself now, sliding a document toward me. Upside down. Daniel's business needed refinancing, she said. Interest rates changed. There were complications. And? I said. And the bank required additional security. I flipped the document around. My name was on it. Not as owner. As guarantor. I stared at the page. My signature stared back at me. Only, it wasn't mine. The room seemed to tilt. That's not my signature, I said. Daniel exhaled sharply. You said you'd help. I said I'd look at the numbers, I replied. My voice sounded far away. I never signed anything. My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the paper. You were overseas, she said. The timing was urgent. Your father handled it. Something inside me went very still. You forged my signature, I said. No one corrected me. The silence confirmed it. My chest tightened, not explosively, but with a slow, crushing pressure. You used my credit, I said. My assets, without telling me. It was temporary, my mother said quickly. Just until things stabilized. And if they didn't? I asked. Daniel looked away. If the business failed, I continued, the bank would come after me. Well, he said, defensive now. It didn't fail. Not yet, I said. I pushed the document back across the table. My hands were steady. That surprised me. So let me understand, I said calmly. You put my financial future at risk without my consent, and in return, you're cutting me out of the house entirely. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. That house is Daniel's home, she said. You don't even live here. I grew up here, I said. She waved her hand. You moved on. Daniel stood up abruptly, chair legs scraping. You're making this into something it's not, he snapped. You always do. Always dramatic. I looked up at him. Sit down, I said quietly. He didn't. My mother stood too, suddenly flustered. We didn't think you'd react like this, she said. We thought you'd understand. Understand. I gathered my bag slowly, deliberately. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. Undo it, I said. My mother shook her head. It's done. Then fix it, I said. Remove my name. Rewrite the will. Make this right. Daniel scoffed. You can't just... I can, I said, meeting his eyes. But you won't like how. That was the moment something changed. Not in them. In me. As I walked out of that house, past the photos where I was always standing slightly apart, I realized something with startling clarity. They hadn't just chosen him, they had used me. And the worst part? They thought I would stay quiet. I didn't confront them again after that day. Not because I was afraid, not because I didn't know what to say, but because something colder than anger had taken hold of me. Clarity. The first night after the betrayal, I sat alone in my apartment with every light off except the lamp by the window. The city hummed outside. Cars, distant voices, a siren fading somewhere far away. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. I just watched the surface ripple as my hand trembled. They had forged my signature. That wasn't just betrayal. That was a crime. But crimes, I had learned over the years, were only punished when you could prove them. Undeniably, cleanly, publicly, if necessary. So I stopped reacting. I started documenting. The next morning, I called in sick to work and laid everything out on my dining table. Old emails, bank statements, property deeds, screenshots of messages I'd never paid attention to before. I opened my laptop and began building a timeline. When had Daniel first mentioned refinancing? When had my parents suddenly become curious about my assets? When had my father insisted on handling paperwork while I was traveling? Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped looking away. There was an email from my father sent while I was in Lisbon, casual in tone. Just need a quick confirmation. Bank stuff. Nothing urgent. Enjoy your trip. No attachment. No follow-up. Nothing that asked for consent. 2 days later, the forged document had been filed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. They hadn't panicked. They'd planned. I requested copies of everything from the bank. Every document. Every version. I didn't accuse. I didn't hint. I sounded calm, professional, almost bored. People give you more when they think you're not emotional. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. That was when I saw it clearly. The signature wasn't just forged. It was sloppy. Too round, too rushed. Whoever had done it had mimicked my name, not my hand. Any forensic analyst would see it instantly. I felt something close to relief. Then I kept reading. Buried in the paperwork was something worse. A clause. If Daniel defaulted, even partially, the guarantor's assets could be liquidated without prior notice. My condo, one of my rental properties, years of careful work, gone. I closed my eyes and let that sink in. They had risked my entire future to protect his comfort, and they hadn't even warned me. That night, my mother called. I let it ring. She called again the next day, then my father, then Daniel. I didn't answer any of them. Silence, I discovered, unnerved them far more than anger ever had. A week later, I did something I'd never done before. I went back to the house, unannounced. My father answered the door. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me. "You should have called," he said. "I'm just here to pick up some documents," I replied calmly. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house felt wrong, like a set after the actors had left. Too quiet, too staged. "I'll be quick," I said. I went straight to his study. He followed me, hovering in the doorway. "You're upset," he said. "But this doesn't need to become a big thing." I opened a drawer, then another. "Did you sign my name?" I asked, not looking at him. Silence stretched. "I did what was necessary," he said finally. "For whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was when I noticed the folder on the shelf above his desk. Dark blue. Labeled neatly. Estate planning. My fingers paused. I reached for it. "Don't touch that," he said sharply. Too late. Inside was the updated will. I scanned it once. Then again. Slower. Daniel inherited the house. The remaining savings. Even a sentimental watch my father had once promised me when I was a teenager. My name appeared exactly once. A nominal sum, in recognition of independence. I laughed. The sound startled both of us. "That's it?" I asked, holding up the page. "That's what I'm worth?" My father's face hardened. "You don't need anything from us." "No." I agreed. But you needed plenty from me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you make trouble, it won't end well. For anyone. I looked at him then. Really looked. And I realized something important. He wasn't threatening me. He was afraid. I slid the will back into the folder exactly as I'd found it. I just needed to see it, I said calmly. As I turned to leave, my phone, still recording in my pocket, vibrated softly. That night, I listened to the audio. His voice was clear. I did what was necessary. If you make trouble, it won't end well. I saved the file in 3 places: cloud, external drive, email to myself. Then I waited. Weeks passed. Daniel's business began to wobble. Not collapse, but strain. Late payments, tense phone calls. My mother's voice when she finally reached me sounded thinner now. We should talk, she said. I'm busy, I replied gently. At work, I smiled. I laughed at the right moments. I attended meetings. I played my part. At night, I planned. I consulted a lawyer. Quietly. I showed him everything. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "They have no idea how exposed they are." No, I agreed. They don't. The public event, the next one, was already scheduled. Daniel was being honored. Community award. A speech. A stage. My family would all be there. So would witnesses. I bought a new notebook and wrote a single sentence on the first page. Wait until they're certain you'll stay silent. I closed it. And I smiled. The night of the event arrived dressed as a celebration. The community hall glowed with warm lights and polished floors, the kind of place designed to make everything look honorable, respectable. A banner hung above the stage with Daniel's name printed in bold letters, followed by words like entrepreneurship and leadership. I arrived early, not to help, not to hide, to observe. My parents were already there. My mother fluttered from table to table, laughing too brightly, adjusting centerpieces that didn't need adjusting. My father stood near the stage, hands clasped behind his back, nodding gravely as people congratulated him on Daniel's success, as if it were a reflection of his own. Daniel hadn't arrived yet. I chose a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see faces clearly, far enough to be underestimated. When my mother spotted me, she froze. Her smile held for a second too long before she walked over, heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You came," she said, voice tight. "Of course," I replied calmly. "You said family should be together for moments like this." Her eyes searched my face, looking for something: anger, tears, accusation. I gave her none. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "We need to talk. After," I said. "Tonight's about Daniel, isn't it?" Her lips pressed together. She nodded once and walked away. I watched her shoulders stiffen as she returned to my father. Daniel finally arrived to applause. He looked confident, relaxed, wearing the same expression he always wore when the room was on his side. He hugged our parents, shook hands, soaked in the attention like sunlight. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Just slightly. He came over anyway. "You didn't tell me you were coming," he said. "You didn't ask," I replied. He studied my face. "You've been quiet." "So have you," I said. Funny how silence feels different depending on who's using it. Before he could respond, the host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said brightly, "thank you for coming tonight to honor someone who embodies dedication and vision, Daniel." Applause filled the room. I clapped with everyone else. Slowly, evenly. Daniel took the stage. He adjusted the microphone, glanced out at the audience, and smiled. He spoke well. He always did. He talked about perseverance, about risk, about the people who had supported him when things were uncertain. He gestured toward our parents. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father nodded, proud. And, Daniel continued, about family. Who believes in you enough to stand behind you no matter what? That was my cue. I stood. The movement caught attention immediately, chairs creaking, heads turning. The host faltered mid-smile as she noticed me approaching the aisle. Daniel froze. I walked calmly toward the stage. Someone whispered my name. Someone else said, "Is that his sister?" When I reached the front, I didn't climb the steps. I looked up at Daniel and smiled. "Do you mind if I say a few words?" I asked, voice clear, steady. The room went silent. Daniel laughed nervously. This wasn't planned." "I know," I said. "Neither was fraud." The word landed like glass breaking. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father stood abruptly. "This is not the time," he snapped. I turned slightly so my voice carried. "Oh, it is," I said. "Because this is the moment you all care about reputation." Daniel stepped closer to the microphone, his face flushed. "You're embarrassing yourself." I tilted my head. "Am I?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, the same color as the one in my father's study. "I was listed as a guarantor on Daniel's business loan," I said calmly, "without my consent." Using a forged signature. Gasps, sharp inhales. My mother shook her head violently. "That's not true." I looked at her. "Do you want me to play the recording?" Her face drained of color. Daniel's voice rose. "This is insane. You're twisting things." I held up a single page and turned it toward the audience. "This is the document filed with the bank," I said. "And this," I flipped it, "is my real signature." Even from a distance, the difference was obvious. The host stood frozen near the edge of the stage, hands clenched. My father pushed forward. "You don't understand how these things work." I smiled softly. "I do. That's the problem." I reached into my bag again. "And this," I said, "is my father admitting he signed for me." I pressed play. The room filled with his voice. Unmistakable. I did what was necessary. A beat. "If you make trouble, it won't end well." Silence crashed down like a wave. My father looked as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Daniel backed away from the microphone. "Turn that off." I did. "This event is being recorded," I continued, glancing at the cameras near the ceiling. "So is this." I turned back to Daniel. "You said family stands behind you no matter what," I said. "You're right. I did. Quietly, legally, financially." My voice didn't shake. "You put my assets at risk," I said. "You rewrote a will to erase me, and you assumed I'd stay silent." I looked out at the audience. "I won't." My mother sank into a chair, hands over her mouth. The host finally found her voice. Perhaps we should take a break." "No need," I said gently. "I'm done." I turned back to my family one last time. "The bank has been notified," I said. "So has my lawyer, and so will everyone else who needs to know." Daniel stared at me, eyes wide, exposed, smaller than I'd ever seen him. "This isn't over," he whispered. I smiled. "It is for me." I walked away from the stage as whispers exploded behind me, cameras flashing, conversations breaking into fragments. For the first time in my life, the room wasn't on his side, and I didn't look back. The fallout wasn't loud at first. It was quiet, administrative, the kind of quiet that comes with emails marked urgent, meetings scheduled behind closed doors, and phones that stop ringing all at once. For 3 days after the event, no one from my family contacted me. Not my mother, not my father, not Daniel. I didn't take that as peace. I took it as damage control. On the 4th day, my lawyer called. "They've retained counsel," he said. "Separately." That alone told me everything. The bank moved quickly once the forgery was undeniable. My name was removed from the guarantor agreement within the week. Not gracefully, there were penalties, fees, and a restructuring that hit Daniel's business hard, but cleanly. Clean mattered more to me than kind. The forged documents triggered a formal investigation. My father's calm, authoritative reputation evaporated the moment his recorded voice entered the process. He stopped returning calls from old colleagues. Invitations dried up. Daniel's award was quietly postponed, then removed from the organization's website entirely. No announcement, just absence. That was justice, too. My mother finally came to see me 2 weeks later. She didn't call ahead. I opened the door and found her standing there, smaller somehow, clutching her purse with both hands. Her hair was pulled back too tightly. Her eyes were red, but dry. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of my couch, as if afraid to take up too much space. I remained standing. "You humiliated us," she said finally. I tilted my head. "You did that yourselves." She flinched. "We did what we thought was best," she whispered. "For whom?" I asked gently. She looked up at me then, really looked, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in decades. "I didn't think you'd fight back," she said. I nodded. "I know." Tears finally spilled over, slipping down her cheeks. "You were always so quiet," she said. "You never needed us." I crouched slightly so we were eye level. "I needed you," I said. "You just never noticed." She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. "I can't fix what you did," I continued, "but I can stop pretending it didn't hurt." She left shortly after. No apology, no excuses. Just the weight of truth settling between us like dust after a collapse. My father never came. Daniel tried once. He called late at night, voice tight with anger and something like fear. "You destroyed everything," he said. I leaned against my kitchen counter, listening. "No," I replied calmly. "I exposed it. You could have handled it privately." I laughed quietly. "So could you." He hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Months passed. Life didn't magically become lighter, but it became clearer. I sold one of my properties. Not out of necessity, but intention. I simplified. I traveled. I slept better. For the first time, my success didn't feel like something I had to hide to keep the peace. At work, I was offered a promotion I'd quietly earned years ago. I accepted it without shrinking. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for the guilt to come. It didn't. What came instead was something steadier. Relief. I still think about that first eviction meeting, the one where I slid the papers across the desk and my parents finally realized I wasn't bluffing. There was no shouting then either, just consequences. People like to believe justice is loud, dramatic, explosive. But the most powerful kind is calm. It's paperwork filed correctly. It's evidence preserved. It's walking away without begging to be understood. I didn't win because I embarrassed them. I won because I stopped protecting them. And in doing so, I finally protected myself. Now, when people ask about my family, I don't explain. I just smile and say, "I learned a lot from them," which is true. I learned how silence can be mistaken for weakness, and how dangerous that mistake can be.